Hi, this is Kara. Welcome to Breaking Free Fridays, or welcome back if you've been following this series. It's great to have you here. So, today I was guided to talk about navigating challenging family dynamics. And this is such an important topic because we, more than ever, it seems, are really seeking deeper connection and more meaningful relationships. And yet, oftentimes, we find ourselves more and more disconnected. So, this is such an important topic to dive into. And I was also inspired to talk about this because a friend of my daughter's was over visiting the other day and was sharing some really deep struggles around some dynamics in her family and some things that she's really been struggling with, which are often really common, unfortunately. But she happens to be in a situation where her grandma has been favoring her sibling since she was really little, and as this friend got to a point, later in her childhood where she had more autonomy and, more awareness, and she actually created a boundary for herself around this, and really decided that it wasn't best for her to be around this person, her grandma, and so she basically chose to disconnect from that relationship for a while, and found herself in a situation where her father basically got to a point where he was really guilt tripping her into being in that relationship again, and being part of that dynamic and those get-togethers that involved her being around the relationship with his grandma that was really, really hurtful for her. And she ended up deciding to comply because it was easier. There was less conflict in it, and it was easier for her to put herself in that situation instead of holding firm on her boundary. And it brings up a really interesting dynamic and something worth talking about deeper, because often we find ourselves doing that. We find ourselves compromising ourselves, our values, what's best for us, in the name of peace, and then the name of making somebody else happy in the moment. And yet, one of the things that's so important to realize is that when we do that, we are actually betraying ourselves, and we're doing that at a deep level, and we're also allowing basically a violation of what's best for us. We're allowing somebody to impose on our boundaries, and I'm dissecting this from a place that it seems very easy, and yet when we're in these places and we're in these situations, it's not. Like, the dynamics can be very real and very challenging, and so it's helpful to kind of pull back and see, what actually is unraveling at a deeper layer. In this particular example, and we can extrapolate this into all sorts of different relationship dynamics, but over time, that wound of compromising ourselves gets deeper, and it creates greater disconnection from ourselves, and that is really challenging, because we almost create this split energy, if you will, a sense of not feeling safe, and we're doing it. That's the irony. We are usually doing it in an effort to feel safer, to feel more at ease, or to have more peace, and yet meanwhile, it can feel like we're crumbling on the inside. So one of the things to keep in mind when we're exploring relationship dynamics is there are certain relationships that have a safer quality to them, where it's easier to push our comfort zone in terms of new skill development, actually exploring, conflict resolution, going deeper, and really pushing past some of those areas of discomfort to get to a place where those relationships have deeper connection, that they are more meaningful, that there is greater depth to them. And then there are other relationships, and these can all be within a family dynamic. There are other relationships where it's better to have stronger boundaries, and it's an invitation for creating those boundaries that create something that's safer and healthier for us. And it's kind of that invitation into a dance to realize, what are we able to most effectively do and keep ourselves in balance and in harmony, and really valuing what it honors ourselves and our needs the most. One of the things that you can actually strive for as well, in evaluating different family dynamics, is the more healing that we do in our own world, in our own inner work, the more we actually can shift from within the nature of the way that relationship dynamics play out. Sometimes a relationship is really too toxic to even invite that possibility. However, there are other times where if we don't take the invitation and the call to greater empowerment and greater healing, and wholeness within ourselves, then even if we disconnect or even estrange from a certain family dynamic, if our soul has a lesson with a certain opportunity that relationship is bringing forward, then even if we disconnect in that particular relationship, we'll find that other relationships and dynamics are drawn to us that recreate a similar dynamic, until we learn that lesson and we come to a different level in our soul evolution. So keep that in mind as you're really awakening to some of these things. Relationships tend to have the most healing opportunities in them, because they are so reflective of things within ourselves that we may be rejecting, and that are invitations for us to come into greater integration and greater wholeness. So when we get really irritated or really triggered by someone or someone's behavior, certain dynamics, there is an invitation there to see, okay, what is the reflection for me? What is the opportunity for me? As opposed to looking externally, and really seeing it as just being about the other person, because there's also always this invitation for self-development and awareness and healing to go to a greater level, which is something that is really empowering and can be super transformational in terms of family dynamics and opportunities there. One thing to share on that as well, if you think about the nature of relationships and where relationships and the quality of relationships live, it actually lives within us, and it's by virtue of the meaning that we give and how we define relationships. So one of the things that is really empowering, and I'll share a personal example on this, is as we get to a place where we are not actually defining the success or quality of a relationship by virtue of our expectation of another person, how they actually show up or don't show up in accordance with our expectation, but rather our acceptance of them as as their own unique individual, as who they are, and how they are showing up in their own journey, basically honoring the fact that they're their own unique individual, and they're on their own unique journey. When we are able to accept at that level without an agenda of trying to control them or having them behave in a certain way in order to make us feel better, because we're already basically centered in ourselves strongly enough that we have this beautiful acceptance and wholeness from within. So we're not seeking that external validation or that external love to the degree that it's actually derailing us from our own sense of self-worth, our own relationship with self, our own alignment with God, or however you define that, our higher source or creator. The more empowered we are in general, and also in our relationship dynamics and with family. And while we're born into our families, there's also the opportunity for chosen family too. And so when we get into those places where sometimes we may find ourselves compromising our own well-being out of loyalty for family, that's blood family, or by not only loyalty but also just almost by thinking that there's not choice, we have choice in how we relate, and how we perceive. And so that's where there's a lot of opportunity. And I want to share, going back to, I know I was mentioning earlier, an example for myself that I think might be helpful. My dad was an alcoholic, and fortunately in my adult life, he was more than 20 years sober. But in my childhood and my youth into my young adulthood, he was an alcoholic. And as a result, there was a lot of abusive situations going on. And as I started doing more and more inner work and awakening and doing a lot of different healing, one of the things that I came to realize and that I started to reconcile was understanding that my dad did the best that he could, and he was an amazing dad in so many ways. And there was also this aspect that was very true, that was very harmful to me. And so I could have decided that, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with him, because, and even when he was sober, there were still remnants of things that would appear almost like dry drunk kind of behavior. And instead, what I chose to do is I allowed myself to grieve the dad that my inner child wanted, in my youth, my inner child, that I thought that I needed or I deserved in those moments. I allowed myself to grieve that. And even the loss of the dad that I thought might be able to meet me in a relationship that was much more on an aware level, much more conscious level. I allowed myself to let go of that and to grieve it and to be at peace, so that I could bring in the beautiful opportunity to embrace the relationship that I could have with my father in the best way possible, accepting where he was at and who he is on his unique journey that is different from mine. And that brought so much freedom. And what I found, which was incredibly empowering, and I hope you find this hopeful. So as I did more of this healing work, one of the things that I noticed is that at times when his tone or something that he would say or the angle, when it was very reminiscent of something that was abusive in my childhood that used to cut me at my knees and basically shut me down just like that, I got to a point where I could hear what he was saying, and I could hear it through a different lens. It's like everything about that experience took on a different meaning and a different level, instead of it shutting me down, cutting me at my knees. I could sense his pain. I could sense the little boy in him that was traumatized and abused. I could sense the frustration in him at the lack of tools, that he couldn't get across what he wanted to communicate in a more effective way. And it elevated our relationship in a totally different way. It was like I had this freedom that became so beautiful and so freeing. And these are possible, as well as, other dances that you may, involve yourself in elevating your relationships and the different dynamics in your family. And as you reflect in your own journeys of empowerment and in breaking free, finding your way to greater connection and greater depth, not only with yourself, but in those other relationships. And sometimes that means going forward, pushing that comfort zone and giving those, safe people a chance to go deeper with you, develop better skills, enriching your relationship. Sometimes it may mean taking that leap into greater boundary depth, being stronger about what is right for you, and also exploring that perspective and that meaning of relationship, and just up leveling. These are the kinds of things that I explore with clients. And if you're interested, please email me at Kara@KaraPierceWhitney.com. If you're enjoying these videos, I'd love to hear your comments, and please share them with other people, your friends and family that you think would benefit as well, and subscribe. I do these every week, the Breaking Free Fridays. And one last thing I wanted to share about that story with my dad. So, in looking back and reflecting, sometimes we think, gosh, if we only had something different. And yet, at least in my experience and sharing from my heart, I'm so glad that my dad was exactly how he was, because I'm the person that I am today in great part because of the experience that I had, and how that invited me to different levels of healing and awakening and awareness. And we all get these opportunities to really embrace the gifts and the challenges in our lives. And so I just invite you to explore these family dynamics a little bit more, and realize that sometimes people, honestly, they do not realize how they come across. And they can welcome those opportunities to go to a place of greater connectedness with you. And obviously this is something to really, take care and navigate. But let me know how this is landing, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Here is to your next level of empowerment and breaking free. And bye for now.